Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are bound together by one story of the abuse of a slave. It is wild. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. And this story also helps us process making rash, spontaneous, emotionally driven decisions. But we'll get there. First, the story. Okay, so the version that I'm most familiar with comes from the Christian and Jewish scriptures in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis. And in the book of Genesis, God promises Abram, who eventually is called Abraham, over and over and over again, that he's going to have a bunch of descendants. The problem is that Abram's wife, Sarai, who eventually is called Sarah, is not able to conceive, which is problematic for her in so many ways. It's problematic for her culturally because if a woman is unable to conceive, people assume that there's something wrong with her soul, right? They equate the physical well-being and all of that stuff with somebody's spiritual health. So she's already sort of an outcast, but it just goes on and on. God keeps promising multiple descendants, and Sarai keeps not being able to have children. And so eventually Sarai says to Abram, I've got this slave named Hagar, and I want you to go into her, if you know what I mean, and I will, you conceive a child with her. And Abram says, okay, and he goes into her, into the slave Hagar. Hagar conceives, and then things get a little awkward. And that's where the story sort of goes off the rails. Sarai pulls Abram aside one day and says, hey, look, ever since Hagar has conceived, it's not cool. She is not being the way she's supposed to be as a slave. And Abram says, well, she's your slave. Do what you want. And Sarai is horrible to Hagar. And we don't get the details of what happens, but let's just talk about the result. The result is that Hagar runs away. In the ancient world, running away is very dangerous. Like, traveling is incredibly dangerous. You don't travel by yourself. And as a woman traveling by herself, she's just in danger of all of the things, of dying, of having everything stolen from her. And then it says that she goes to a spring where other people are, which is another thing that could prove to be incredibly dangerous. But that is how abusive Sarai has been to Hagar. It's so abusive that a pregnant woman would run away in the ancient Near Eastern world and take everything, put everything, her bodily health, her unborn child, all the things at risk. The other thing we find out is that God is not going to count this child as the beginning of the fulfillment of God's promise. This one is not going to actually count. It's going to have to be one that is the product of Abram and Sarai. And so this all happens at the spring where Hagar is there, and it says, like, God meets her there, and God says, okay, look, this is not going to count for Abram's heir, but I'm going to make this child of yours into a great nation. Like, kings are going to come from him. There's going to be many, many descendants. It's the same kind of promise in part that God gives to Abram. And then God says, and also you need to name this child Ishmael. Oh yeah, and God tells her she's got to go back, which she does. But this is where the connection is. Ishmael is one of the very early parts of the story of Islam, right? Eventually, Ishmael grows up, moves away, and is mistreated by his family and all the things, but that is part of the Islam story. And this is wild. Here's how this helps us process when we sort of make these rash emotional decisions. Like, that's what happened with Sarai. She made this quick decision, we're gonna go about this a different way. And when we do that, when we make those sort of very spontaneous, very rash, emotional decisions to try to stop the pain, in ourselves, it doesn't work, usually. Usually, instead of stopping the pain, it causes more pain in more people. And if we had just taken a beat, thought it through, we could have anticipated all of the pain, all of the fallout, and probably come up with a better decision. But we don't. And when we don't do that, when we don't get in that habit, when we let ourselves do this, it's just devastating sometimes. But sometimes you're on the other side. You're the victim of the decision, and you end up in all kinds of pain. And, the first thing you've got to do is just get away, right? You've got to remove yourself. You've got to run away. You've got to take care of yourself for just a minute. And then while you're taking care of yourself, you've got to find something good, some silver lining, some positive thing that you can say, you know what, this is bad, this is horrible. We're not going to minimize that, but something good can come from it. There is some positive thing that's going to happen. But running away ultimately isn't the solution. You've got to go back. You've got to face things head on, and you've got to deal with them appropriately. There's so many more details, so many more fascinating pieces of this story, but that's for the Unbelief podcast, right? And this episode has this and so much more. You should totally check it out. If this kind of stuff fascinates you, you would love it. Just search for Unbelief wherever you find the podcast.